Hi, I'm John, and you're listening to Catholic versus Atheist.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, John, what you believe and why.
I don't believe there is a God, so I'm an atheist. And I believe this because of my understanding of the universe, essentially. From what all I've learned so far in my life, my reasonable guess is that God doesn't exist. So in particular, the gods of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
How do you exist? How do you explain your existence? Is there a first cause? How did you get here?
This is essentially the deepest question you could ask. The Big Bang model, as far as I understand, is the best scientific description of the beginning of the universe that we have, or at least what we know is that 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was compact, dense, and hot. And if you ask me, was there anything before that? I don't know. Maybe. What caused it, I wouldn't be able to say.
Do you have any philosophical aversion to an infinite universe where there was no beginning?
Not particularly, and the reason being that there's so many things that are counterintuitive in this world. Quantum mechanics, for example, doesn't make sense the first time you learn it, but you get used to it, So maybe the universe is infinite in the past, and we just have to accept it.
Would you be also comfortable with a universe that extends into the future?
That's actually much less controversial. As far as we understand, the universe will just grow old and old and old until we reach the heat death of the universe, where everything will be dark and cold. We're talking about 10 to the 100 years, so a long time in the future.
In this universe, whether it has a beginning or not, we can say with certainty that there was a time in the universe where there was not life, and then life appeared, and some point in the future, life will come to an end for whatever scientific reason. Would you say that's a safe thing to say?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, yeah.
And if the universe doesn't have an end in time, but it's actually infinite, then however big this window of life is that I just described, it's approaching zero in terms of absolute percentage of time.
If my understanding of the universe is correct, then yes, life will be a very, very short event in the universe, in the whole lifetime of the universe.
But the more important aspect is morality. Where's the value? Where's the meaning in good versus evil? Do they have any meaning for you as an atheist? And if you do have morality, is it objective and eternal? Like 1 + 1 is 2. Would you agree that that's an eternal truth?
Actually, this is a construct. When you say 1 + 1 = 2, what you are saying actually is we made up a game. We made up the number 1 as a concept, and we defined 1 + 1 to be 2. Actually, so it's true, but tautologically, because we defined it to be true.
Do you think that we invented the number 1?
We invented the concept. The thing is, there's no substance that is 1.
It's immaterial.
Yes, it's immaterial, and it's a construct. For example, even if you have 1 apple, you can slice it in 2 and then you get 2, So it's all a matter of subjectivity, the number. The way we apply the number 1 to the world is subjective, but the concepts, the rules are clear.
Can you envision a time where society adopts different rules such that 1 + 1 is not 2?
Sure, you can make it. I mean, mathematicians work on this all the time, but of course the thing is, now the correspondence to reality is very little, of course. Now, why do we use mathematics? Because it's quite effective at describing the world. You could make a mathematical system where 1 + 1 is equal to 3, and actually you could probably do a bunch of stuff in it, but you wouldn't be able to apply it to the real world.
There's a consensus now with mathematics, 1 + 1 is 2.
Yes.
But if the cashier subjectively wanted to decide that for her 1 + 1 is 3, she gives you the wrong change. What is the authority by which you would force her essentially to conform to an arbitrary set of mathematical rules?
Personally, I wouldn't be able to enforce anything. If she wants her mathematics rule to be 1 + 1 is equal to 3, she will just do that. But of course, she will not be able to stay a cashier, because if she doesn't give me the right change, I'm going to complain because it's not what society agreed on.
Do you believe in objective morality? There's a right and a wrong.
Morality, I think, does exist quite obviously, but objective? No, I don't think. In the far future or in the far past, there were no humans. The concept of morality didn't even exist because there was no one to apply morality to.
You admit that humans are moral beings more so than the apes?
For humans, we have a very complex society, so we need rules to ensure that things go smoothly, and we can call these morals or morality. I think animals have some form of primitive morality. For example, apes, they don't just kill each other all the time. When they kill each other, there's some reason they will help each other at sometimes, and then they will fight it at some other time, a bit like humans.
What do you think of cultural
Relativism. It has weaknesses, but I would say that you can only contrast morality, a set of moral guidelines, with another set of moral guidelines. You cannot judge it from a vacuum. You have to do it from another point of view. So from us, it's completely obvious that this is completely immoral, but that's because we have a moral framework that we use.
That could be learned and it could be unlearned?
Yeah. Morality is quite of a fluid concept. You can get very tricky situation in morality, like where it's really unclear what you should do and if you do this, if it's right or wrong. Now you asked me, is there any meaning? I don't think there is any intrinsic meaning for us. I don't think it's divinely set what we are and what we should do and so on. What I think is that everybody finds their own meaning in their own lives. For example, for me, I always imagine a universe where there was no life at all. No sentient life and no life at all. But still, rainbows and rain and mountains and clouds and all these things. And I always say to myself, it would be a shame to not be able to witness the beauty of this world. You know, when you look at the telescope, everything is so wonderful. So for me, my personal reason to live is to experience the beauty of this world. For me, that's the most relevant thing to do, is to appreciate the beauty of the universe that we live in.
Is there something special about our sophisticated brains that makes us better witnesses to the beauty of creation than a monkey or a cat?
I do think that we have a deeper understanding of the universe than a cat and even the most intelligent ape, I think. And I think this does help quite a lot in appreciating the beauty of the universe we live in.
This universe with the rainbows and the waterfalls and all the beauty, it wouldn't be quite as satisfying if it were just cats and apes and dogs and monkeys witnessing that. Is there a hierarchy in the animal kingdom?
If you try to tackle a bear and try to put him down, you will die and you will lose quite dramatically, you know. So a bear is much more fit in certain areas. It so happens that humans have intellectual capabilities that are, I think, much beyond most animals. So if we compare ourselves by intelligence, then yes, I think we're pretty much the most intelligent or the best in that category. But if I put you in water with sharks, it's not going to work so well.
The Catholic Church says we have free will and reason that the other animals don't have. Do you agree with that? Do you believe in free will?
I mean, what does it mean, free will? It's unclear if such a thing even exists to begin with. I don't think there's anything uniquely different in humans, but it's just that the characteristics that we have, our intellectual capabilities, are just much more developed.
It's a difference in degree, not in kind, would you say?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Do you believe that everything is cause and effect and there's no wiggle room? If you throw a rock, its behavior follows scientific laws.
Yes.
Are you bound by the laws of nature?
Yes, I think so. I think essentially everything by definition is bound by the laws of nature.
Is there the illusion of freedom, or is there the possibility of real freedom?
Is there a difference between a perfect illusion of free will or having free will? No. I think we do have a nearly perfect illusion of free will, so that essentially there's no difference between having free will or not having it. For you, what's your position on free will?
My position is the Catholic position, and the Catholic position is always both. Take any deep philosophical issue where people get divided, the Catholic Church is always embracing paradox. Paradox is different from
Contradictions, yes.
It's the illusion of contradiction. There's a very big difference between a paradox and a genuine contradiction. And I would say there's a very big difference between the illusion of free will and actual free will.
How would you be able to distinguish the difference?
We can't. We're philosophically feeble-minded. God can. That's the whole point.
For something to be somehow relevant, it has to have some effect. When you say that there is a difference between having free will and having the illusion of free will, but that we cannot make the difference, If you cannot distinguish between the two, there's no way you could make a difference.
I want to go to the core issue, which will allow me, a person of faith, to embrace free will and will keep you from embracing free will. The leap of faith. The leap of faith that you take is not to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The leap of faith that you take is into realism, naive realism, where you just assume that the other exists, that the world exists, that all those sense experiences correspond to some kind of reality. That's the leap of faith that you take. And I applaud you for that, because we do live in reality, but I also question why you're willing to take that leap of faith if you're scientifically minded, because it's not a scientific
I agree,
gesture.
But this is, I would argue it's pragmatism. I could try in my head to make up a story about the universe, and I could try to deny the senses that I have. I could do that, but I will not be successful at essentially anything. It's sheer obviousness that you just have to accept the world as it is. I see no other way of doing it.
It's a pragmatic decision to live in reality as it is.
Yeah, so for me, it's just pragmatism to accept reality
As it is.
as I perceived it for the time being.
Okay.
Because it's just the sheer force of what I perceive. It overwhelms me. I have to... Yeah.
So you think it's unreasonable, perhaps, to just dismiss the mountains of sensory data evidence? All these things that we can't really prove scientifically.
We do know that our brains do trick us sometimes. So sometimes it is hard to know what is actually there. You have to accept at least some part of what you perceive to be true to some degree.
There isn't a lot that separates your worldview from my worldview. We both choose to live in reality and accept reality and work with reality. But the difference is that I choose to believe, since I took the leap of faith to God, that my thirst for health and beauty and justice and goodness and all those things will be fulfilled, ultimately.
But you believe that they were somehow given to you. Your purpose is linked to that of God.
Yeah.
And your meaning of life as well.
Yeah. God is everything. He's the source of everything that's good, life and justice and beauty and truth and all the things that we seek. And so there's nothing that falls outside of God's domain, nothing good. We can participate more fully in life, and we can move towards life, and we can orient ourselves in the direction of life, or we can choose to do otherwise. This is what free will allows us to do.
God somehow gives you morality. Do you believe in absolute morality?
Yes.
How is this absolute morality and God related?
It's all about nature. God is not a creature, God's the creator. So out of his generous love, he created everything that is. Okay. He himself is uncreated. He's the first cause, he's uncaused, he's the prime mover, the unmoved mover. He's the being whose essence is existence, whereas we're contingent. So he just is, and he's just all self-sufficient and happy, and he doesn't need anything. He created freely out of his generous love, creation, the universe and us and everything. And he created us humans in his image, meaning free will and reason. I have a human nature. So morality is about corresponding to reality, corresponding to the reality of my human nature that God gave me in his goodness and in his infinite wisdom. The example I like to use is if you're in the wood shop and you've got a screw and you've got your tools, you can select whatever tool you want. You can bang it with the bandsaw, you can bang it with the hammer. God wants you to pick up the screwdriver, and not only any screwdriver, the Phillips number 2 that fits into that screw. So it's about correspondence to reality. It's all about sanity. And yes, you can bang it in with a hammer and it will work to a certain extent. It's just not ideal. There's a better way. There's a more efficient way, and it's his way, not because he's a tyrant or a bully, but because he made it and it's all good.
If I were to pose a moral dilemma, do you think there is always a right answer or a wrong answer? Not that we can necessarily know it.
I don't want to get all biblical on you, but if you read the New Testament, you'll see the Jews trying to trick Jesus with questions where there's no winning answer, and yet he finds a way. So I think there are bad questions. Just out of ignorance, we can ask the wrong question sometimes. On the other extreme, we could say that every moral dilemma has one clear-cut answer in God's mind.
Imagine that there's a train, there's no conductor, and it's going to hit 3 people. And you're standing on a bridge, and down there's a switch, and there's a guy next to you. If you push that guy, he's going to fall on the switch and make the train deviate and miss the 3 people. Now the question is, should you push the person or not? Would you know the answer?
I would probably need to think about it, but there are principles that would guide my decision. One of the principles is the ends don't justify the means. So you can't do any evil so that good may come of it. You just cannot. That's one principle in the Catholic Church. The question in and of itself probably will involve other principles, and I would need to look at the question closely. But I'm pretty sure I could come up with an opinion. I wouldn't necessarily trust my opinion, but I know for sure that there's an answer to something like that.
I suppose that God does have perfect knowledge, that the decision that he takes is the right one, but you as a person, you never have perfect knowledge. So it's really hard to make the good decision because it depends on factors that you cannot know.
For humans, it's impossible, but for God, nothing's impossible. So there's this tightrope that we walk between knowing that we will fall and we'll make mistakes and we're imperfect, and striving nonetheless to always live by God's 10 Commandments and live by principles that the Church gives us. It becomes a question of exercising your freedom and exercising your love, basically, because having a list of rules and saying in this circumstance do this and in that circumstance do that, that eliminates merit. The whole point of life is to show your love, and the way you show your love for God and for neighbor is by struggling with the complexities and being in a situation where you don't know what the rule is and how to apply that rule. If it were simply a matter of applying a list of rules, we would essentially be back to where we start as atheists with this mechanical scientific view. This works, this doesn't work.
Well,
and
I kind of disagree. I mean, even if we knew always what the right thing would be to do, there would be nothing forcing us to do it. Even if I knew that pushing the person would be the good thing, hypothetically, there's nothing forcing me. Even if I know it, there's nothing forcing me to do it.
Yeah, there's also nothing forcing me. We both are naturally, in our human nature, inclined toward the good. The reason you reach for the proper screwdriver is not because there's some sort of imposition. It just makes sense. It's just common sense that if you're going to achieve your end, whatever that end may be, working with nature will get you there, and working against nature may not.
Well, it could work, but it's not the optimal.
I am a free moral agent, and I am going about my business trying to accomplish things and trying to experience things. And if the grass is getting a bit long and I need to cut it, I'm probably not going to go out there with the wet dish rag and start rubbing it. It just doesn't work.
You give really example where the answer is kind of obvious. Of course, if you want to cut your lawn, you should go with the lawnmower for sure. But you can always make examples that are very subtle.
Well, what do you do if your girlfriend, for example, says, "Oh, I just got these new jeans. Does my rear end look big?"
Fat, yes.
You know.
But do we agree that given this circumstance, if you were to say no, it is a lie?
No. It's not a lie. It's called discretion. There's a classic example given by the Church where a violent madman busts into your home and says, "Where's Charlie?" And you know that Charlie's upstairs. You're not obliged to tell him. I'm pretty sure that the Church teaches that it's okay to quote-unquote lie in that circumstance, because the number one principle is life.
But then all these objective morality that are like intrinsically true and always true and always have been true, it undermines this whole concept. Thou shalt not bear false witness, for example. If you don't say the truth to the murderer, you did bear false witness. Even if you choose to call it something else, for me there's no difference. I think it undermines the whole objectivity of the thing.
Another example I would bring to counter what you're saying, and the way that we are free, more free with religion than without, is the example of Jesus on the Sabbath. He was doing things on the Sabbath and they objected. And he said, quite simply, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So it's just a question really of priority and of hierarchy and of the reality of that hierarchy of values, and not becoming obsessed with the letter of the law and man-made traditions. He was quite adamant about that with the Jews of his day.
You talked about the 10 Commandments. So one of them is, thou shalt not kill, for example. So as far as I understand, you do think there are some circumstances in self-defense, for example, where it could be legitimate and you wouldn't violate the commandment.
That's correct. And there's no compromise whatsoever of the principles involved.
And how do you tell the difference?
That's the challenge of living. Because if it's not a challenge, then it's not going to exercise our free will as moral agents.
What is the difference between saying, thou shalt not kill, this is objectively true, always has been, always will be, but there are some circumstances where you can, and this, we have to determine what it is. What is the difference between this and just saying, sometimes it's okay to kill in some circumstances in self-defense? Or
the essential difference is understanding that in principle, there is an elegant solution to a very, very, very messy math equation on the chalkboard. There's a difference between saying it's just nonsense and let's just forget about math, and saying, well, I have it on authority from these geniuses that means something. And if I wanted to apply myself, take a lifetime or two, I too could see through that. But I'll just take it on authority for now. And I'm comforted by the principle that 1 + 1 is 2, and that's the foundation for everything, and that this is legitimate. I think there's a very big difference between saying, well, we don't know, because there are exceptions, there are complexities, and there are nuances, and we're feeble-minded, frankly. And on the other hand, saying, I know that God is good, I know that He created a rational universe, I know that science is good, I know that ultimately there's a rational explanation for everything, whether it's a ghost sighting, an Elvis sighting, or quantum tunneling, or whatever it is. I know there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. I think it's the more scientific approach, rather than just saying there's no difference between the illusion of science and the reality of science.
I think I know where the difference lies. So when you go to this chalkboard and there's this messy equation that you don't understand, and some people tell you, oh, actually it means something, at face value you either accept the claim that means something or you reject it. But if you choose to accept it, you can then work and understand it, and at some point you can actually achieve an understanding. Not even within 2 lifetimes. Within 1 lifetime you could probably do it.
Depending on what kind of intellect you have.
Depending, yes. But still, it's within grasp. But the examples that you give me with God and this perfect answer or this solution, this is not even theoretically achievable as far as I understand. Do you have knowledge of anyone who actually achieved it?
Yeah, all the saints in heaven. Right? This is the whole point, is there's definitely a connection between us in this fallen world, the saints in heaven who are with God and who see God and who are moving every moment closer and closer to God and His love and His wisdom. So there's a hierarchy and there's a connection.
How do you determine if somebody is a saint or not?
One simple way, the easiest way, is if this person died for his Christian faith. So Muslims take over, they say, convert or die. If you don't renounce Jesus Christ, we will kill you because you're Christian. And you say, I'm willing to die for Him, and they kill you, you actually go straight to heaven and you are a saint. That's the easiest, quickest way to determine if someone's a saint.
There's something you just said that really, really scared me. If you're willing to die for your faith. In Islam, this is a concept. In Wahhabism, it's difficult for me that you don't see the problem in this, because these people that, for example, blow themselves up, they do think that they will go to heaven because they die for their faith. And you say, oh, but also in Christianity, if you die for your faith, it's also... Do you understand
You're missing one very important principle. If you're killing innocent lives in order to die for the faith and go to heaven, you're breaking one of the 10 commandments.
But then you just said that you can argue that the commandment, thou shalt not kill, you could make an argument.
Well, yeah, if you struggle as you're dying for your faith and you happen to kill one of the 6 guys who's attacking you so you can protect your family, you killed in self-defense as you were dying as a martyr. That has happened, it will happen, and there's nothing wrong with that, because the principle is that you are trying to defend innocent life against an attack.
How do you determine that innocent lives is the criterion?
Every life is worthy of being defended. If these murderous people come to your home and they want to kill you because of what you believe, whether you're a Christian or whatever, you have the right to defend yourself. That's the principle of life at work. And so there's a huge difference between suicide bombing people because they have the wrong religion and being the victim of the same aggression. We'll take the case of extreme Islam because it's in the news and it's on everyone's mind. I personally like Islam. I think it's a false religion, but I think that they worship the same God that we and the Jews do, so they're very close to my heart. But if these extreme Muslims came in and were killing me and my family, I would kill some of them in self-defense, I hope. If it would save the lives of the innocent, even though the people I'm protecting wouldn't necessarily be Christian. Huge difference for me between the Christian martyrs dying passively and a suicide bomber planning a malicious, hateful, violent, murderous event.
I understand the difference. It's quite clear, the difference. But it's clear for us, but it's not clear for them. It's a very, very subjective thing. You know, when you said you have to protect innocence, even the term innocent is a highly subjective term. I am sure that when you talk with these people who are ready to die, they are 100% convinced that what they're doing is right, and they have arguments, and they believe those arguments, and they have a at least partially self-consistent story about why they're doing this. It makes sense in their framework. They have a justification. For example, you make your own justification. Okay, well, if they want to attack me, then I can defend myself, and like it makes sense. Even makes sense for me because I'm from also like
Western culture.
Yeah, Western culture, and we share very much the same culture and so on. There's nothing for me. There's nothing that differentiates the two other than we happen to agree. And they happen to disagree.
Cultural relativism.
Well,
let's just get rid of that thing that's bothering you about the innocent people. Let's say that there's a really sick pedophile who killed his young child victims after having sex with them. Horrendous criminal. He's guilty and he doesn't deny it. He's proud of it. So I'm the security guard. So some murderous person comes in and wants to kill him. I am protecting him. His innocence doesn't mean that he's not some sick criminal, murderous pervert. What I mean by innocence is that he has the right to life, this guy. That guy deserves to be protected. And that's what I mean by innocent life. Because there's the aggressor coming, no matter how they justify, he deserves to die and this and that, the other thing. It's just not his place to come in and kill him.
But...
So the whole question of innocence really is a lot broader than what you thought.
Okay, then I have to ask you then. So, are you against the death penalty?
The first principle is the principle of life. I'm pro-life for the children in the womb, the elderly, the criminal. The fact that the church hasn't come down with a totally dogmatic hard line on the death penalty, but just is more or less leaning towards clemency, tells me that there are some nuanced cases where maybe, it's an extension of self-defense. This person, unfortunately, doesn't leave us an option. Now, I wouldn't want to have to make that call. That seems like a tough call to make. But I'm willing to admit that in principle, there may be cases where the death penalty is okay. But I would imagine that those cases are few and far between.
It's very hard for us to agree on anything objective. You're like, okay, the Catholic Church doesn't have a dogmatic position on this, but they lean towards that. But then I suppose there exists this answer that is above this, whether it's right or wrong, or...
Well, God knows in each case.
In each case,
it's a case-by-case thing. Let's take a simpler, clear-cut example of abortion. You can't really find nuance. Maybe there's a nuanced case where the mother's life's at risk and they're trying to save the baby and the baby dies, but you take that intervention, even though there's a risk of killing the baby. The principle is to save the mother and the baby, and it just so happens there's a risk and the baby dies, and it's not a violation of that principle.
But you can make it as subtle as you want. For example, you could say, like, what if there's a 1 in a million chance that the baby dies during the intervention, and if you do the intervention, you save both, but there's a 1 in 1 million chance that the baby dies. Should you do it?
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yes, of course.
Obviously. But then a 1.5 chance that he dies.
A 50-50 chance.
Yes. I don't want you to say like, oh, well, you should do it or not. But the point is, you can always make it as nuanced. Like,
you can find the gray zone.
Yes. Okay, you do it, yes, at 50%. What if I say it's 55%? It's, for me, this shows me that there is no right answer, because it's just what risk are you willing to take? That's all there is, essentially.
The fact that it's difficult and challenging to answer in those gray areas, I think, proves that it is a very important moral question, that something of value hinges on the decision. If it was something insignificant, we wouldn't be searching for that delicate, nuanced gray area where it's hard to find the answer. But we're not Catholic because it simplifies morality. It does clarify a lot of situations. Like, for example, sexual morality. In our society today, I can sympathize with the atheists when they just don't want rules about who does what in the bedroom. I can understand that. since I became religious, I have a completely different perspective where God Almighty, who made human nature and has a plan for humans and loves humans, he says, don't have gay sex, so you just don't have gay sex, you know, even though you could legitimize it as an atheist. Same thing with pedophilia. Like, if there's a 60-year-old man with a 6-year-old girl, they could probably get some sexual thing that would be pleasurable between the two of them. But
well, maybe not 6, maybe not, but whatever.
why not? Why not? This is the thing about morality, right? If you're going to talk about cultural relativism. You know Charles Manson, the killer? He was a big proponent of getting rid of all the cultural taboos that were lingering in society in a post-Christian world. Why are we against homosexuality? Why are we against pedophilia? Why? Let's get rid of all these social constructs. If it feels good and it's two consenting people.
There's something that you did that kind of makes me a bit uncomfortable. You were talking about two men having sex, and then you contrasted it or compared it to a pedophile.
No, I didn't. I just threw 2 examples. The only thing that joins them is that they're taboo. They're forbidden by my religion.
At least, yeah, okay, by your religion, yes. For me, one is completely okay, and one of them is completely not okay. And for me, the line is the consenting adults.
What is the problem with father and son consenting to gay marriage to each other?
Is the son more than 18?
If you want him to be. Does it make you more comfortable?
Yes. Do both of them want to be with each other?
Yeah.
Then, okay, if you want.
Yeah. So you don't have the taboo of incest that a lot of people have.
First of all, it's 2 guys, so they cannot have babies.
What about father and daughter?
If the daughter is more than 18,
yeah,
and they both agree and that's both what they want, I am a third party in this thing. I don't have anything to say in this thing. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea because...
What if the 6-year-old daughter says, yeah, I want the lollipop and I'm willing to do what you want, daddy?
That's a different thing because she's not an adult. And of course, what does it mean to be an adult? It's unclear, but in our society, it's defined at 18 years old. And I think that's a reasonable definition for most, but not all.
Are there any 18-year-olds who lack mental capacity?
Of course, of course. You have 34 years old that also lacks mental capacity and will also get abused by their partners. I mean, if you're 18 and you're with somebody that's very old, that's not a good idea because you have a controlled dominance. But if you nonetheless want to do it, who am I to say no? If you guys are adults, you do whatever you want. If it's consenting, of course.
Does the reason for giving your consent matter? A sexual act, and the consent is given for reasons of deep devotion and love and poetry and candlelit dinners versus a bag of money and a bag of cocaine.
No,
is one consent better
I would
than
say
the other?
One is more dangerous. At least to the eyes of the law, it should be regarded as equal. I mean, of course, in Canada, prostitution is illegal. So technically doing this would be illegal under law. A priori, I don't see a problem there because I have something that you want and you have something that I want, and like we do an exchange. And if both parties are happy with this, then I have no objection about this.
Really, there's no difference between your application of your principles to these hypothetical situations and my application of Catholic principles. The only difference is that my Catholic principles on the surface to an atheist would appear more rigorous, more limiting. We can do fewer things than the atheist. The atheist has gay marriage, masturbation, adultery, all kinds of things.
So you are against homosexuality, I suppose.
Where there's no free choice, there's no possibility of sin. So if you have an inclination to adultery, you want to sleep with your neighbor's wife, that's not a sin. That's just a temptation. But if you act on it, that's a sin. So it's the same thing with masturbation or homosexual acts or stealing. You know, you could be inclined, I really want that guy's iPad.
Yes.
Or his stereo.
Yes.
But wanting it, having that feeling or that desire or that orientation is not a sin.
But then the act would be a sin.
Yeah, to varying degrees, depending on what you know.
Of course, if you make up with someone and you don't know it's a guy, then I suppose it's not a sin. But
No. I mean, what you know in terms of morality. If you think that it's perfectly healthy and normal and legitimate and rational and sane for two men to have sex with each other, and you do that, there's no mortal sin.
When we talked about people who blow themselves up, they don't know that what they're doing is wrong. So technically, it's not a sin for them because they
I hope they go to heaven. It doesn't look good. But only God knows. I wouldn't wish hell on those people. Would you? It's not a nice place.
Oh, that's what I've heard, at least.
It's
Yes.
not a nice place. So I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
So you think that the act of, for example, homosexuality is a sin, so which means that it's not good?
Well, any sex outside of marriage.
Okay, yeah, okay, but why is that?
Because God said so. That's the short answer. I could draw on the chalkboard all kinds of ways to make it work. Oh, well, if I sleep with the secretary and her husband never finds out, I could map out this whole scenario where it looks pretty good to the atheist, but God said don't do it, so that's it.
But you're not interested to know why?
Yeah, of course I am.
Could it happen that at some point you understand why God doesn't want you to do this, and you disagree with the reason?
My whole body and soul could rebel against God's reality. It could, and it does. That's the challenge of being a Christian in this fallen world, is that we don't want to do it God's way. We want to do it our way. That's the whole struggle of being a Christian. Of course, we know what the right thing is to do in a lot of circumstances, cut and dry. And we just don't do it. Even St. Paul said, I don't do what I want to do. I do what I don't want to do. I don't do the right thing. I do the wrong thing. There's my spirit, and then there's my body, my flesh, and my desire, and they're at odds with each other.
I was in Germany, in Munich. I lived there for 3 years. I was walking downtown, and there was this stand of Muslims, actually. So I went there, I talked with them. And one of them in particular, I talked a lot with him. And I asked him, why don't you eat pork? And he told me, well, because God told me I cannot eat pork. And for me, I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because if you don't tell me why, I don't see any reason to not do it, actually.
The story that comes to mind is Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I think the power of Abraham's faith is the whole point of the Muslim saying, God said not to eat pork, so I'm not going to eat pork. And I trust God. There's a connection between faith and obedience. It turned out that Isaac wasn't sacrificed. A lot of atheists will say, well, God's mean because he's testing us and all this sort of thing. That's not how we see it. That's not how a good Muslim sees it, or a good Jew, or a good Christian. We, the monotheists, see God as all good, all loving. And in our weakness and in our struggle to learn how to love and how to be godlike, we can end up in some pretty weird situations, bewildering circumstances. And it's not like God manipulated us into some weird scenario. God put us in Eden, in the perfect paradise, and we deviated, and we suffer the consequences. And these consequences are not imposed arbitrarily by some tyrant. They're actually just cause and effect. You move away from the light and you're in the darkness. You know, you put your hand in the fire and you get burned. That's the nature of reality. So I see the beauty in the arbitrary will of God as it's portrayed, even though it seems absurd. And Abraham, you could say, would be justified to say, I'm not going to do that. I waited so long to get this son. I'm already old. Doesn't make sense because he promised that he'd be my heir, and it doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to do it. That would be the rational atheist approach. But he had faith.
So it was a good thing that he trusted God then.
Yeah.
And I suppose, and for you, is it legitimate for you? Do you think they are right in not eating pork because God said so?
I think it's false religion and that we're allowed to eat pork. But I think that according to his conscience, he has to obey his conscience.
Yes.
And his religion that hopefully he believes in teaches him not to eat pork. He should not eat pork.
But the question, the fundamental question is, how do you differentiate between the two? How do you differentiate between the case that Abraham had, where God told him, kill Isaac, and a Muslim doesn't want to eat pork because God tells him? How would you tell a Muslim that is not correct? And to you, how do you know that you are correct?
It's a bunch of converging arguments that bring me to the conclusion that Christianity is true and Islam is false and Judaism is false. Sure. Judaism was true up until the Messiah came. And even during that pre-Messianic period, the Jews went astray, always. That's the whole Old Testament. Just read it and you'll see that they're going astray all the time. But there's that true religion that is carried through up until the coming of the Messiah. Then the Messiah came, and now it's the Catholic Church. So the question is, how do I know I'm in the right church? And how do I know Islam is not the true religion, the one true religion? Because when two worldviews contradict each other, if there's one objective reality and one objective moral truth and one objective true religion, we can't both be right. We could both be wrong. There may be some third religion that's the true religion.
Or hypothetically non-hypothetically.
I think there's a truth. But getting back to how you know, it's looking at the evidence. For example, they deny the crucifixion of Christ. I just look at the evidence and say, well, I think Christ was crucified. Maybe he wasn't. But I look at the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, and then the Quran, and I see discrepancies. And I look at the history, the non-Jewish, non-Christian history of the first century and the birth of Christianity, and I look at what the Muslims say, and I choose to go with the evidence that says that Christianity was Christian rather than Muslim, because the Muslims have a different vision of not only the religious books, but of salvation history. So it's just a question of looking at objective reality, looking at your sources, looking at history, looking at scholarship, looking at everything. And of course, no one has time to really, really dig into depth to learn all the original languages, to look at all the original manuscripts, to cross-reference them and do all that sort of thing. But you look at the works that summarize that, and the works of scholarship and the works of popular writings, and you can also look at the people that have come before you, who are the great heroes of your faith, and what did they teach? I would not be Christian at all if it were not for the saints. It's the saints that made me choose Christianity over Islam. I wanted to be a Muslim when I found God, but I was compelled by the evidence of the heroic virtue of the saints and how they lived and how they died. And it's 20 centuries of saints. It's the lives of the saints and the deaths of the saints and the love of the saints.
I understand what you're saying, but another person would have a different pillar somehow, things that are more important to them, and then they say, oh, that's more important, so I'm going to choose Islam. And then it seems like a very subjective thing.
It is. Of course it is. Well, why are you atheist? Why are you not Catholic? It's because you are moved by what you've read and what you've seen and what you've experienced and science and everything else, and your upbringing and whatever.
Yeah, but being an atheist, it just means that I don't subscribe to something. It so happens that I also do believe things about the world, but that's a different story. When I say an atheist, is because I wasn't convinced by the arguments.
Yeah, but you've heard the witnesses, for example, that Jesus Christ is God incarnate. He's the second person of the Trinity, came to earth and died for your sins. You've heard these things.
I heard, yes.
You just don't believe it.
And even after investigation, I don't believe it.
Right.
Even, yes.
I was an atheist. What changed me in my particular subjective path to God was asking the tough questions about meaning, about value, and about morality. And ultimately, am I alone, or is the other real? And if I'm not the source of life, then who is? That's the philosophical approach that brought me to God, but you're on a completely different path. You may just hear a piece of music one day and say, wow, God is God. I don't look at the devout, sincere Muslim as some kind of fool who's deluded and in any way inferior to me intellectually. I just look at him as being on a different path, and God watching very carefully and doing everything in his power to cooperate with that Muslim and loving him and keeping track of when he violates his conscience and when he obeys his conscience.
My problem with this whole story, I mean, have you heard of Carl Sagan?
Yeah.
Anyway, so he had a famous sentence, extraordinary claim require extraordinary evidence. You have been convinced of the truth of Christianity by some evidence, but this is a very, very extraordinary claim. I mean, that God exists and the Bible is true and all these things. The evidence that you've brought up for me that doesn't stack up nearly as much as I would need to think that the claim is true.
I think that it's extraordinary that I exist and that I have no way scientifically of justifying this hypothesis that you exist. I just have to have a pragmatic, naive realism and just say, well, let's get on with life. You're in that same boat. You have to acknowledge that you partake of life and love and goodness and truth and beauty and justice and all these things. And I know for a fact that deep down you're not satisfied with a bunch of molecules coming together in the right way and getting sophisticated to the point where we can create the idea of God and create the idea of perfect justice and create the idea of good versus evil. That's not satisfying.
Why?
Because it's completely arbitrary, meaningless, and it adds no value to you.
Yeah, but the universe doesn't owe us meaning.
In your heart of hearts, you want your life to matter. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do want my life to matter, yes.
And if you say it's a Darwinian mechanism to propagate the species, that doesn't satisfy you.
Well, I mean, I want my life to matter in the way that I want it to matter, essentially.
The ephemeral or the fleeting nature of life, all life, from the beginning to the end. Its insignificance is undeniably, overwhelmingly depressing. It is. It is. Objectively. If you actually rationally, scientifically look at reality as you, an atheist, portray it, it's infinitely brief. There's no lasting value.
this is not where I find value, because for me, the meaning of my life will not be in 10 to the 100 years, what will I have accomplished? For me, this doesn't matter.
Why have you not killed yourself, or why do you not plan on killing yourself? Why?
Because I do enjoy living.
And I presume you would struggle to survive if you're in circumstances where it was precarious. For example, if your health declines, you'll seek medical help. Or if you're in a dangerous situation, you'll seek safety. These sorts of things. I think it's only natural and human, and in your heart of hearts, you value your life and you know that your life has meaning. That's the driving force behind struggling to survive. No? You value your life enough to seek medical help if you're sick, and
in the hope that I will have more interesting experience.
you want more of life and all life has to offer you.
Yes.
Yeah. You have a hunger for more life. There's not going to come a time where you say, I've had enough life.
But first of all, I'm not about to die, so it's hard for me to say. I know I still have a lot of the things to experience and to live for, but I cannot say when I'm going to be 105 years old, maybe I'll be like, look, I did what I had to do, and like, I had a good life, and like.
I can paint a picture for you where you will say yes to prolonged youth, prolonged health, prolonged creativity and intellectual capacity to learn and to experience things. You're going to say yes, 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 yes to all these.
Because it gives me higher quality of life.
Right. But that's what we're all after. We're all after happiness and all the things that you want, I want. But
Yes.
the difference is that you seem to be willing to say, well, the quality of my life will decline at the end and then I'll be ready to just end it. Okay.
I don't know.
We can prove me right by eliminating sickness and decaying body and age and declining intellect and all those things. And just say, if you could have more, of course you want heaven with God forever. Of course you do.
Well, that I'm not sure. But if you ask me, would you like to live, say, 200 years, a very good health? I would say, like, sure. But that is not because my life has any intrinsic value in itself. It's because of what I experience with it. I'm not going to be sad because I stop existing, because and at least as far as I understand, I will not exist. I will not give a damn about it.
But you yourself have said that the value of your existence is the fact that you are a witness to the rainbow, a witness to the waterfall. You are an accumulator of experience. You are essentially a sponge for soaking up the good things that life has to offer, no?
Yeah, to some extent. And not only that, but also I try to also make the life of other people good as well.
Maybe we'll end with one topic that's a little bit big, the topic of love. Like, so your mother's love for you, just talk about that and what it means in terms of your atheist worldview.
We have various degrees of approaching the thing. I can know that the reason that my mother loves me biologically is because I'm her son, and that there is some genetic component to it. I know that this is how the mechanics of the things work. But when I experience it, like, I just love my mother and she loves me, and like, we're at a lower level. We don't wonder why are these things the way they are.
Is it like nutrition? You just eat the food, it tastes good, and you don't think about it too much. But if you analyzed, you could see the cold, hard facts of those nutrients going into your bloodstream.
That's what we do all the time. I mean, even when, like, that's another level. You cannot really talk about them at the same time, somehow. There are times where I analyze the nitty-gritty details of things, and there are times where I don't. So
you let go and you just...
And you just experience things as they are. For me, it's unclear if there's a right answer, but overall, I'm pretty satisfied with my worldview, I think. I find it self-consistent and logical, and I find that it does work for me as well, and it makes sense with everything that I understand about the universe as well.
So just to be clear, you've never believed in God?
As a child, I probably did, I suppose. Because, I mean, here, it's a very Catholic background here, especially if you're a French Canadian as well, like me, like, there's a lot of influence. So for sure, I think I might have believed, but it's just not an important factor for me anymore.
Do you envy people that have faith?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I would like to pretend like things that are not true are true, and I would like to pretend like there is somebody that could possibly care, but me wanting to pretend, sometimes it's not a good argument for me. So
you just answered your own question about, is the reality of free will better than the illusion of free will? I think you just answered it.
No, but I mean, I suppose it would be nice if I knew that there would be someone that cares for me in the grand scheme of things. I suppose sometimes it could be nice. And so you're like, it could be nice, I suppose.
Do you think you would be inclined to love a God that loves you so much as Christianity teaches that God loves you?
Well,
would you find it natural to respond to love with love?
It depends. I mean, the God of Christianity, I have like a lot of objections. Well, that is another big topic as well. but just to know if we're on the same page. So the Old Testament, the part about Genesis and all these things, like what's your position on this?
My position is the Catholic position.
Which is, I forget now.
The Bible is inerrant. There's no error. There's no contradiction.
Okay.
And its primary author is the Holy Spirit. It's God.
Okay.
So we have infallible sacred scripture and sacred tradition. And we have an infallible head of the church, the Pope, who is protected from teaching error concerning faith and morals.
In the Bible, there are some questionable things that God does.
Yeah, those are easily explained. For example, whenever they talk about God's anger, he's not disturbed by any emotion. He's not. It's a condescension. It's a literary technique whereby God, the ineffable and undefinable, reaches down to his creatures on our level, talks to us on our level. And when he says in the Bible that he's angry, we understand right away. But in truth, in reality, he is not perturbed in the slightest. He's perfectly happy all the time, always was, always is, and always will be. His anger is a cause and effect working out of reality, just like when you stick your hand in the fire, God said not to do it. He's angry when you do it. And that anger is the burning of your flesh on your fingertips. That's what his anger is. But he's perfectly tranquil, peaceful, happy, and whatever. There's no anger, there's no emotion getting stirred up in God, ever. He needs to condescend to us. So there's a lot of that in the Bible.
Given an arbitrary amount of interpretation, you can make anything say anything. Okay? So I understand what you're saying about this condescension and so on and so forth, but and actually it does make sense. I mean, that's why you believe it. That's because it makes sense for you. But it's quite a bit convoluted. And the thing is, you could explain anything. For example, the Garden of Eden, it didn't factually happen, but then you can come up with some mechanism inside, and then you will rescue the thing.
Yeah. But there's something that you're missing in your evaluation, and that's that my acceptance of the Bible is not based on the Bible. My acceptance of the Bible is based on my trust in the saints and my trust in God. Because before I found God, I didn't believe the Bible, you know. And after I found God, I still didn't believe the Bible. But I believed the heroic saints who, in their virtue and their love of God, was so powerful. They loved my God so perfectly. They were able to open up Scripture, and they told me to trust the church.
I could possibly admire some of the saints who gave their lives for people and so on. I can appreciate what they did as well. And I think they're very good people and so on. But there's quite a bit of jumps that you have to do logically from going to, I admire the saints to...
It's not that different from your typical Western atheist believing what he reads in Scientific American. You swallow a lot of information that you can't verify. A lot of information. And there's an inherent need for us to do that because we don't have time to verify.
When I read articles, I would possibly trust the person that says it because they are in the magazine. I would be like, okay, a priori, I believe what you...
Until you learn otherwise.
Until I learn otherwise. But the thing is, this knowledge here affects my life not much, actually. If I come here and like, I tell you, well, I have a dog, you know, and then you're like, okay, you have a dog, that's fine, I believe you. If I come here and I say like I'm the Messiah, you're not going to trust me as much. And for me, it's like the same thing. The claims are of very, very different nature. And also the mechanism by which the claims have been verified is completely different. I mean, in a scientific journal, you would hope that there is a scientific method that confirms or at least removes as much bias as possible, you know. But in theology, there's no, as far as I understand, there's no such process which is as reliable or that you cannot confirm it.
I see theology as a scientific system. We have the data of the sacred deposit of faith, which is the Bible and sacred tradition. I mean, I've accepted all of that complex stuff, sacred scripture and sacred tradition, based on, number one, my unshakable faith in God the Father, and on the lives and the witness and the testimony of the saints. It is a big leap, but you don't leap into a vague cloud of unknowing. You leap into a library of historical documents and theology and testimony and pure philosophy and natural philosophy and theology. And you leap into that. It's up to you how much you dig into it. As Catholics, we're obliged to dig into the truth. We're obliged to be philosophers. And I admit that I'm fallible and I could be wrong and I might be part of a false religion. But I'm pretty sure, and I keep digging into it and verifying. And of course, you could point to confirmation bias. But if I'm seeking truth, it's not in my interest to delude myself. If Islam is true and Christianity is false, I will join Islam. But I am convinced more and more that Christianity is true and Islam is false.
The point you make about the confirmation bias is actually quite true, because when you have a worldview, it's quite easy to find supporting evidence. For example, the Easter Bunny. You can find a lot of evidence for his existence. There's pictures of him everywhere on Easter. There's even a holiday for him. It's easy to find evidence that supports your belief. What's hard is to try to look out for evidence that do not support your belief.
I would sidestep the entire question. Why do I believe in God the Father and why do I not believe in the Easter Bunny? It comes down to that existential angst of, am I the source of my own existence or not? Am I God or is God God? And that is not the kind of thing you can jumble up with all kinds of cultural confusion. You go home at night, you lay in bed and you ask yourself, what am I? How did I get here? What is this life that I partake of? Am I the source of life? Or is there something outside of me and above me that's the source of my life? You cannot compare the Easter Bunny to God Almighty, because when you lay down at night and in your heart of hearts, especially if you're sad and lonely and things aren't going well, you won't be thinking about the Easter Bunny. You really won't. You'll be thinking about your life, what it means, how you got here, and these deep existential questions, not about chocolate.
Yeah, but actually the fact that we humans would look for some anthropomorphic figure is already a sign that there's bias in our...
My God's not anthropomorphic.
No, I mean, at least God made us in His image.
Reason and free will.
But it is still anthropomorphic in the sense that it has will, it's good, it helps people, I suppose, it performs miracle. These are all anthropomorphic qualities. Usually in society, people are good, people do stuff, people love each other, God loves you. That's a highly anthropomorphic. I understand it's not a person in your...
It is a person, 3 persons, but it's the inverse of anthropomorphic, meaning that we are made in God's image in the physical sense, in as much as the second person of the Holy Trinity became man, and He's the first man. And we are modeled after Him and we're supposed to imitate Him. So Jesus Christ is a human being. Even now up in heaven, He has flesh. It's a glorified flesh, but He is 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head.
That's almost silly, because I'm going to ask, where is He located? But
at the right hand of the Father in heaven.
So do you think heaven is somewhere physical? When you're in heaven, do you stand on something?
It's the presence of God.
Do you have a body, first of all?
We are familiar with our human nature and with the nature of the universe as it is.
Yes.
So heaven is not going to be unfamiliar. It will be familiar. It'll just be better. Jesus Christ is in the Eucharist. So He is, right now, if you look behind us, He's in this church.
Yes.
In the tabernacle.
Well, I suppose technically also God is also everywhere as well. So He is also there, but he's also everywhere. So why should we talk more about this thing? Why should we make a distinction?
Well, the same reason we make a distinction between the historical fact of Jesus' incarnation, when He came, took on flesh, and was born of the Virgin, and walked around Galilee and Judea.
Yes.
Would you admit that that's a unique and special and significant instance of God's presence?
You can make it if you so want. You can make anything, say anything. So if you want, you can say it's different there, then it's also different than when He's there, if you want. I mean,
but do you not understand the difference? If Jesus Christ chose right now to come down from heaven and stand in front of us, that would be more exciting. It would be more tangible somehow.
Yes.
It would be like I could shake His hand. Do you not see the significance of the intervention?
Of course I do. I mean.
So it's the same thing with the Eucharist in the tabernacle. It's just
a difference.
Much it's more. It's more exciting. It's tangible. We get to eat Him.
Okay. Which is a bit creepy if you ask me. He
lost most of His disciples at that moment when He said, in John 6, He said multiple times, time and time again.
Yes.
You have to eat my flesh, you have to drink my blood, and blood is taboo for the Jews.
Actually, can you imagine if it sounds a bit creepy if you ask me, but
Yeah.
I mean...
You asked me earlier, well, don't you want to know why God prohibits homosexual act? Of course I want to know. And of course I want to know why we have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. But I'm not going to doubt it just because it seems odd to me. Like, I could ask God about circumcision. Like, why is that the mark of the covenant? But it doesn't occur to me to say, because it's wacky and weird, I just won't believe it.
Well, for me, yes.
Because if I throw away the circumcision, I've thrown away Judaism,
Yes.
Christianity, and Islam. I have to necessarily throw away the three big monotheistic religions. And then what am I left with? I'm left with some anonymous God the Father that's never communicated. When I found God the Father, I was compelled in my heart and soul to have public worship in a public religion. It was like a necessity to worship. Just like if you're laying in bed and you realize you have to puke, you find yourself in the bathroom before you know what's happening. The same thing with my conversion. I found myself compelled to go and publicly worship my God. I just can't throw away circumcision because it's weird, or the Eucharist because it's weird. Because in throwing that away, I'm throwing away my Christianity and Judaism and Islam.
If you don't throw them away, you have to come up with all these rather convoluted way of explaining things and so on. And then like you explain the Bible and you explain why circumcision and why not homosexuality. And you have to say, we don't understand and so on. You can make it work. Billions of people make it work. It's a coherent story that's just way too convoluted for me. For me, Occam's razor is like, okay, like, look, it's much simpler for me to say the whole thing doesn't make sense and it's just a fabrication for me. But I understand for you, it's not. But that's a completely subjective point, and I cannot argue with you, I cannot convince you, and it would be also very hard for you to convince me. This is a completely subjective thing of what we choose to accept as evidence, actually.
Explanations are interesting, and they can nourish my faith. Dogmatic facts that are proposed to us for our belief, and we have to believe them if we're going to be Catholic, and if we don't believe them, we're not Catholic. Those dogmatic facts are infallible. They're divine truths given by God to us, and they're unadulterated. We can trust them wholeheartedly. But all the explanation, all the theologians talking about why it might be that that's the case, that's not infallible. It's not protected. It could be wrong. So I don't get excited about the explanation. I just swallow the dogmas as they come to me until I see a contradiction, and then I leave Christianity.
Or how did you call it? It doesn't have contradiction. It has what?
Paradox.
Paradox. Yes, yes. Of course, when there is a contradiction that would appear.
Can you think of an example
Of what in the?
of two Catholic dogmas that contradict each other?
I mean, I don't know enough about the Catholic.
Would you acknowledge that it is impressive that a 2,000-year-old religion is constantly proclaiming infallible truths that they cannot back away from, they cannot change their mind about them ever? Science doesn't do that. Science does the opposite of that. Science says, for now, this seems to be true, we'll modify it later. The Catholic Church says this is absolutely, objectively, universally, eternally true, it will never change. And for 2,000 years, it's been putting its neck on the line, putting out these dogmatic statements. Do you not find that impressive?
Actually, not at all, because as far as I understand, most of the claims are actually unfalsifiable. Like Mary was a virgin, and then she gave birth to Jesus, for example. That's
Jesus only, no other kids. It would be very easy to falsify that claim by showing that she had other kids.
First, it would not be. First of all, it happened 2,000 years ago. Second of all,
2,000 years ago, it was just yesterday that it happened. Do you understand? They were rational humans just like you, skeptical, rational people just like you. They weren't stupid 2,000 years ago. So when the church and the apostles were preaching that Mary was a virgin before, during, and after the birth of Christ, and that she had no other children, do you not think that the Jews and the atheists around would be saying, well, wait a minute, what about Mary's son so-and-so?
I mean, it could be that she only had one kid. But that's a much less impressive. That she had one kid is much less impressive.
What about her assumption into heaven?
But that's also...
We can falsify that by finding her bones. We found the bones of Peter, we found the bones of Paul, we found the bones...
How do you determine that it's the person? This is not an easy task
This is science. This is science. I mean, just look in Scientific American or whatever magazine you want to look at and say, hey, they found the bones of so-and-so. You're not skeptical of that.
First of all, it would depend who. And I don't think it happens so often. I mean, the only things that I can think of is we found the remnants of this Egyptian king in the tomb. It's because we had all these records that it was this person.
It has to be a convergence of many, many forms of evidence. A lot of them being circumstantial, a lot of them being documentary. But just look at some of the big cases of big name people in history that have been discovered, and how did the scientists come to the conclusion, and you just see how they do it. But it is in principle, you will have to admit that it is, at least in principle, a falsifiable claim, that her body was assumed into heaven.
It is true that you are technically correct in that it is technically falsifiable. That is true, but...
Let me paint a picture for you.
Yes.
In the early church, 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, you could walk around the Holy Land and the places where the apostles and their successors traveled, and you would find not only graves, but shrines, ornate shrines, and layers, generational layers of shrines being piled on top of each other, of just the accumulation of the veneration of these saints. If you knew the veneration that the church in the first centuries had for Mary, I think you would admit that we should have evidence of some sort of veneration taking place in the same way that we see on the other grave sites. That's just a common sense argument.
Actually, I'm not sure I follow because
so the big name heroes of the religion have these very obvious multi-generational constructions of shrines.
Yes.
But we don't have one for Mary. And people venerated Mary the most, so she should have one of these special places archaeologically.
The claim that Mary was a virgin and she gave birth to Jesus and also ascended to heaven, that probably dates to the very early time of Christianity. Yeah. So the thing is, if you do believe Christianity, you will not even try to find the bones, you will not try to, but no, you're not going to look for the bones of this person because in your theology, she ascended to heaven. So why would you look for it?
You won't look for it, but your enemies will. That's my point.
Yeah, but
the enemies of Christianity, for example, the Jews,
but do we agree
will be very fast to point out the tomb where Jesus' bones lie and where Mary's bones lie. They were very eager to quell Christianity, nip it in the bud. Let me try a different approach with you, because it seems to me that if these are not important, the dogmas are not important, they are to me. But if you would dismiss them as just being fluffy, disconnected from reality, not falsifiable, no real bearing on anything, that to me doesn't seem like a good argument against embracing the strange teachings of the church.
Yes, I understand what you mean, but I completely disagree, because you can make an infinite amount of unfalsifiable claims. And if I were to accept one of them, to be consistent, I would have to accept all of them, essentially.
What I get from your perspective when you look at my faith from the outside in is it kind of seems arbitrary. And if you accept one wild and wacky, crazy religious story, then you have to accept them all. But nothing could be further from the truth, because I have the certainty of this very rock-solid tradition of the Catholic Church. It's always been consistent. It's always said the same thing. It's unchanging. And as soon as someone says anything different, alarm bells go off. Maybe I misinterpreted what you were saying, but it seemed to me that you were saying, well, if you accept this weird thing, then pretty much anything that's weird, you'll just immediately accept it. No?
I mean, for me, that would be a case. If I were to start accepting weird stuff, to be consistent, I would have to accept quite a bit of them. I mean,
what would be your standard?
My standard is I don't accept essentially unfalsifiable claims or claims that are not sufficiently backed up by evidence, essentially.
Do you accept the claim that your mother loves you?
Yes.
That's not a scientifically provable or disprovable thing.
Actually, yes. I mean, you can ask her, "Do you love me?" And like
you can ask me if God exists too. Is that scientific?
But it's like pain. For example, if you hit me, for example, or if I hit myself and I'm in pain, and you ask me, "Are you in pain?" I say, "Yes, I'm in pain." I know my own body actually. So if I ask my mother, I ask her, "Do you love me?" And she says, "Yes, I love you." And I don't think she's lying. She knows what she feels, actually. But God is an exterior agent to you. Maybe for you is also inside you, so you just know. But from my point of view, he's outside you. So if you say, "Oh, you believe in him," well, it's like, well, I believe that some other guy exists, but it's not like an emotion. It's not like love where it's a subjective thing.
Just so you know, we don't define love as an emotion in the Catholic Church. We define it as an act of the will. It's a reasonable act of the free will. Can you imagine if Jesus Christ said you are commanded to love God and love your neighbor as yourself? Can you imagine how foolish that would be if love was a feeling? You're commanded now to feel something for your neighbor. You cannot command someone to like someone or to feel a certain way about someone or to have chemistry with someone. You can command them, though, to make a choice, a free choice, a rational choice, to will the good of the other person. That's what Jesus commanded.
It's really interesting because the Catholic Church has this position about what love is, and then you have to somehow almost change how nature operates to make it fit in your, because as far as I don't choose the people that I love, you see, but also we might have different definitions.
But do you love your enemies?
I don't think so.
Do you see the merit in Christ's commandment that you love your enemies?
In some instances, yes. Possibly. Not all the time.
And you get to pick and choose?
Yes. I mean, the thing is, I'm not saying that everything that
if we never had good feelings for each other on earth, but we chose to fulfill the commandment to love our enemies, would there be as much war and conflict as there is now?
But that is beside the point. It could be, but that wouldn't be evidence for anything. We could all believe that we're all brothers and sisters have to like love each other all the time, and because there's some magical Easter bunny that said we should, and the world would be possibly a better place.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't make it true at all, or there wouldn't be even evidence that it's true. So yes, maybe if there were more Christians, the world would be better, but that's no evidence that what they believe is true. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. I was just trying to get at the definition of love as an act of the will versus love as a biological, chemical state.
Do I try to love people? Either I love them or I don't love them. I don't choose that. When you say love, you say you want to, what do you say?
You want what's best for them. You will their good.
You will their good. I mean, using this definition, I do love quite a bit of people, actually. I wish most people would actually do well. There's only a very, very few amount of people that I wish they wouldn't do well, but it's really, really, really rare, you know? So it's like, yeah, in that sense, I do love, but that's not what I mean by love, actually. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have a different definition, so.
Thanks.
You want more?
No.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
It's hard.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.